I'm learning on the spot, right? Sorry for this clumsy start. Once again, good morning, and it's a great pleasure for having me here with you. Talking about English as a global language, English as an international language is a very exciting theme for me, and I never can resist doing it. And I really hope that you will help me today to maybe clarify some issues about what does it mean, English in the center of Russia, in Siberia, right? Actually, this is the image from the book, from the report on how English actually lives and behaves across the world, English Next from David Bredel. And it does show that English is something which is bigger than just a foreign language. And as it was rightly mentioned earlier today, digital skills, along with English, which is actually a skill already, right? A core pack that an educated person must have. This is what we are going to talk about now. Oops. Okay, I put these three acronyms on the screen. What stands behind them? Help me. ELF, EIL, and GE. Any ideas? Shout from your place. E is English, definitely, yes. And you're getting the prize. We talk about English. And English in transition, wow, what does it mean? GE, it used to be general, but here it means global English, English which is, as I say, bigger than just a language. ELF, English as lingua franca, because foreign will be EFL, foreign language. So English as lingua franca. What does it mean, lingua franca?
International language.
It's international language, exactly. This is something that you use not very much worrying about special, cultural, phonemic features of the language. As a medium between a Russian person and a Turkish person, for example, in Antalya, when you take your rest. Right, short quiz for you. Could you think of the figures that are missed in the gaps? The population of the world is 7. Billion people speak some English. It doesn't mean proficient.
3.
Around 3. Let's have a look. Well, nearly right. So this is the proportion. And the number of people who actually speak English, natives and non-natives, is a very impressive number indeed. The next short quiz. Million non-native speakers of English. How many of these 2 billion? Okay. For every native speaker there are another how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, just 1, 2, 3, 1 to 4, 1 to 5. I hope it will work. No, it doesn't. Okay. Sorry, it's the problem with the slide. It doesn't want to show this. You might have seen already this is about the ratio, right? So here comes the answer. So it is impressive. It is really impressive. And how actually, so this is the proportion, this is the ratio. And definitely this ratio influences the language, the English language, which we are teaching. We are teachers of English, and gives us some job place, some salary from time to time, right? And actually the discussions about English and what's happening to it is quite a long story. Yet in 1981, and if you are interested, you actually can read this book by Michael Swan. He wrote an article where the English language is going. In 1981, there was a heavy, very tense discussion in the Houses of Parliament among the lords and noble people of England about English. And there were two lines they were discussing. The first was, the English language is going to dogs, which means we are losing it. We are losing it. It's terrible. It's a national tragedy. What to do? The other message was about, well, if it is going to dogs, let at least these be the dogs of our British breed. As we may notice today in the 21st century, it's not working like this. It's working somehow different. Because when, I don't know, people from across the world come to live in Britain, in London, they acquire the language, they learn it, their children are learning the language, but they actually adapt it to themselves and start omitting some important things. When English spreads around the world and people in India believe that this is something to which they have their ownership, they also have some very strong peculiarities about the language. Do we have something like this here in Russia? This is the question. What do you think? Are we changing? Are we helping in sort of adapting English into English, which is more international?
Sure.
Sure. In which way? Could you give any examples? Any notices? Maybe some signs in the street. I asked it with my students. We were making a project when university students were making photos of different signs in English in Krasnoярsk. And their first assumption was that English influences Russian, and Russian is losing, Russian is going to dogs. No, actually what we are actually doing with English is something which is monstrous. This is something for internal use already. And something like, I forgot. All right, I'll give you the example about what we can see in a hotel, for example, or in a restaurant, and you may come up with a lot of funny stuff. Right? So English is not a foreign language anymore. And along with digital skills, English makes a core 21st century skill. This is something which becomes or has become a must, without which you are not properly educated. You are not employable, for example. You cannot go to international conferences. Many people in universities, for example, in higher education, people who are like older than 30, many of them are suffering because they cannot write their academic paper in the proper English, and they have to ask someone to help them because, well, they're deficient to some extent. Right, so the question. List of questions that we need to answer. These are the questions that actually formulated by David Gradle in his English Next report. What variety of English is regarded as authoritative? American? British? Some local stuff? What do you prefer? What do you actually say to your students and to your parents when you start your English classes? They probably ask you, is it going to be American accent or British accent? What do you say? Russian accent. And this is fine, because after 30, 40 years of playing around it here in Russia, we finally peacefully came to the conclusion that there is no problem with the Russian accent. This is fine, and this is actually something that we can be proud of. It's our identity, after all. Which language skills are most important? Reading, speaking, interpreting, writing, academic writing, or whatever. So you decide in your classroom according to the needs of your students, of your audience. And this is again something that makes teacher's role sort of outstanding, sort of different, because you make decisions about how and what you teach. What is regarded as a suitable level of proficiency? So when you're at school, we have these benchmarks like Unified National Exam in the end. What is the level of proficiency? Is it enough for further higher education, for maybe going and study abroad? What is it? What does it mean, apart from getting a mark in your education certificate? How and where will the language be used? Today, in the view of this University event next year, there are a lot of requests that come from the local government. We need a special program to teach taxi drivers to use some English. So it's not high level of proficiency, definitely, but these are practical skills that people should somehow, with the help of well-prepared teachers and professionals, somehow acquire, so that to understand the requests and to actually take a person to the right place finally, and maybe have some small talk while driving. What is the motive for learning? Those of you who are doing private tuition, those who work in private schools, they complain that they do not have problems with money. The flow of cash is good. People want English. But people don't know what for. And mostly these are parents who would bring their unmotivated, completely demotivated kids. And this is another issue. And again, how pedagogically you deal with this. At what age should learning begin? What do you think is the most appropriate age to start so that not to lose all opportunities? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? 5. So you believe 5 is good. But what does it mean in practical terms? How well a teacher should be prepared? What sort of methodology should stand behind? And so on and so forth. By the way, Cambridge exams, YB exams for young learners, in fact, are helping to resolve this issue. And if you're interested, come and join me in the afternoon today. What is the learning environment? When I was a student at school and in the institute, the environment was very clear and absolutely limited. One course book, black and white. At school, the Stokov's family. In university, this fantastic book of Arakin. With great surprise, I found out that many universities are still using it. Arakin was a great guy, actually, for the time. But it's a little bit too much for the 21st century. At least because the language changed as well. And you somehow need to take this into account. Today, when we have this digitalized world, virtual reality, all these fantastic mobile devices that contain Google's dictionaries, I don't know, you can record yourself, you can arrange different activities. The opportunities are vast and fantastic. Again, are you as teachers ready to use this in your classroom? Because the stories I'm hearing now are mostly about how teachers are struggling against mobile phones in the classroom. Yes, they may be interfering, but again, what is the pedagogy? What is the pedagogical value? How you manage this in your classroom to make it a useful tool? Because the kids, they're digital natives in most cases, whilst we are not always. Right, what are the appropriate content and materials for the learners? I'm very happy that the times when we had one Happy English, you remember Happy English, don't remember the author, this lady, Tatiana, yeah. Well, yeah, Klementьева, a nice course book for the 5th graders. With great surprise and disappointment, I was finding it in classes for adults, for very young learners, and the message was that the language is appropriate, these are just starters and beginners, but what about the content? Content needs to be different. We are lucky today. I've seen the display of books you're having in the hall. We have access to a great variety of books. How we choose them, and what is the freedom for this choice, and how we can apply them in the classroom. And what will be the assessment criteria? What kind of exam? We have exams that go top-down to schools. What else could be as an interim assessment that would help you develop English as a core skill, and the core skill which is mostly meant for doing something with the language, doing something useful? So, method. In the second half, after the war, in the second half of the previous century, we were very happy to find out, to discover communicative approach, which was great. But communicative approach, if you remember, was sort of devised by native speakers for the native speakers working across the world, disseminating English across the world, and we are enjoying these wonderful fruits today. However, most of the ELT population are non-native speakers. This is number one. And communicative approach is not a panacea, because it may be not appropriate in your particular circumstances. If, for example, you have a low-resource classroom, like in Africa or somewhere, I don't know, in Tundra, not far from here, you may just have a room, and this will be the limitation. What can you do with this? Or your students have a different background, not sufficient experience, then we do think about post-communicative. Post-communicative doesn't mean all digital and super pooper. Post-communicative is adequacy. I know what my learners need. I know what they actually can do within the circumstance and how I can be of help. So we do talk about lack of a single way for teaching English. No single way of learning it. People learn differently. Some are very silent. Let them be silent for some time, right? No single motive for doing so. If in the center of Siberia we do not have a real reason to speak English, and our students neither do have it, what could be other motives? What could be other incentives for them to get interested, to read a good book, for example, to watch a good film, and acquire more language, develop and grow their motivation? No single syllabus or textbook. Of course, when you work in a governmental school and a state school, we have these prescriptions. However, what else can work in order to match the gaps, the needs, the interests of your learners? No single way of assessing proficiency, and indeed, no single variety of English which provides the target of learning. So this is the context where we are working. However, there are three key global trends which need to be taken into account, and I believe the first one, English for young learners, been developing very successfully and for quite a period here in Krasnoyarsk and in Krasnoyarsk region. Providing more opportunities for young learners to start to link it to young learners' exams. It's a very good motivation both for the learners and for the parents. Another direction, I don't think it is very widely spread here or recognized. Still, we have some points, some growing points in here. This is about CLIL, Content and Language Integrated Learning. It's not about just teaching maths or physics in English. It's about providing the environment where you can actually grow both the content and the language. Special methodology. And I really hope that Krasnoyarsk regional education would turn in this direction and think how this might be introduced in some schools in Krasnoyarsk. And English as a lingua franca, which means that we stop wasting time and efforts and resources developing received pronunciation. We can't do it. Forget about it. But being adequate and teaching the language which is usable for communicative purposes. So just to show you something which might sort of give a bigger picture and give sort of structure of where we are with English as a global language. Sort of English escalator. What is happening now across the world, in fact? The increase of English medium in universities and colleges, which means that in such countries as Finland, Switzerland, Netherlands, they mostly teach in English, and they do not worry about their native language, do not worry about losing it, because they have them in parallel. But English is used as a medium for international education, for global education. school leavers need higher English proficiency. This is probably the problem for us in this country, because as a former university lecturer, I actually noticed that students come to university, most of the students come with this A1 plus level, which is not impressive, most of them, like 80-90% A plus, and they live with A1 plus. So what's happening? Where is the education? What do the teachers do, and how this actually should work? English increasingly used to teach curriculum at secondary schools. Yes, CLIL, for example, again, is very widely spread in Finland, and it goes to the southern part of Europe, to Italy, Spain, Bulgaria, and Turkey, by the way. And English introduced earlier and earlier in primary schools, and like, for example, China, who chose like 10 years ago to introduce English in their curriculum and start as early as possible, which today, as a result, gives many of the school leavers a good chance to enter universities across the world, in Britain, in the US and Europe. This is a very interesting slide that shows you kind of vividly that what was actually the tradition so far. When we were starting at the age of 12 mostly, for us it was 6th, 5th grade, if you remember, right? And the achievement by the end of school years, for this country actually it's mostly true, would be B1, if provided that this student was successful, right? But what is happening now across the world, and what is actually the overall trend? This is it. Starting at 6, finishing school with the levels C1, C2. And this is why in European universities you will not find this subject, English. It is not in the curriculum. You will find curriculum in English rather, which is again quite natural. And this is how we are different from the bigger world. So, what can we do? Poor teachers, right? Teachers' role. Paradigm shift is obvious. From believing that native model, native speaker culture is important, communicative approach is the must, we're actually moving to more tolerant sort of paradigm, more tolerant context where English is an international language context is prevailing, with more intercultural issues. If in your classroom you have kids who are representing different cultures, you may play on it and you develop intercultural environment in the classroom using English, by the way. Learning about other varieties, and all course books today, I believe, are having samples of other varieties, local varieties of English in the UK, for example, or in the US, which may be pretty challenging. People may not understand how people in York or in Liverpool or in Lancaster speak. Local international paradigm, and socially and culturally sensitive. So you see how the world is changing and how English classroom is responding in this respect. I just want to bring some findings, some conclusions from the research of Elizabeth Becker from Hungary and Marcela Carrasco in Ecuador. For years they've been working in different international environment, and they actually made a research on what are the key changes and what are the key issues we need to pay attention in the classroom regarding English language teaching. And some examples about pronunciation, language proficiency, lexis and grammar are going a little bit further. So, implications to pronunciation. What does it mean, global English or English for as lingua franca? Because actually 80% of EL encounters are having other languages, not English. And only 2% of all British English speakers have received pronunciation. So forget about it. I release you from it. Right. So what pronunciation then should we teach? You have a choice between 4 strands. Native, British or American. Native-like, when you still try to follow as far as possible. International intelligibility. When you come to international conferences, people from across the world speak different languages, different English languages, sorry. And you need to make efforts, train your ear to understand everyone and make it sensible. A local variant of English, so choose one. Which one do you think is the most logical?
Native-like.
Sorry?
Native-like.
Native-like, you believe? Huh? Number 3, definitely. International intelligibility. In terms of phonetics. So you may miss your, I don't know, you may put this stress in the word wrong. You may actually be not quite good with intonation in a sentence, but if the other party, your interlocutor, understands you, this is fine for international English language. However, my notice here will be, when you get to the higher levels of proficiency, C1, C2, and if you want to take a test and get a good score, then you will probably have to work a little bit more to be intelligible. However, accent is not penalized in the exams, right? Next, some key features about pronunciation. We may be tolerant about the vowel length in quite a number of words if it doesn't change the meaning drastically. We are more or less happy with all consonants. It's interesting that these 3 sounds, sorry, I didn't have this special, failed to find it in computer, to put the th and the. This is phonetical. And I put as th. This is a real disaster for many classes and for many teachers. You spend hours and hours forcing your students to pronounce it correctly. Actually, international standards of English, they are tolerant if your students would say something like, which I hate to pronounce, like thank you. Oh my goodness. Right. or make this substitute with f. This is fine. But if someone, maybe you remember this was a nice video clip on YouTube about a German guy getting information on emergency, and people, they are complaining, we are sinking, we have SOS, we are sinking, and he says, okay, what are you thinking about? So it may be a tragedy. Right, sentence stress is important, right? Are you coming on Tuesday? And this is something that we need to pay attention in the classroom with our learners. Or are you coming on Tuesdays? This is about meaning, what meaning stands behind the stress and intonation. Some consideration of what should be grammatical and lexical focus in international English. Well, we need to be aware that language is changing. Maybe English is changing quicker than other languages, but this is my hypothesis, I don't know. But the dynamic nature of language is crucial. Revising the materials and actually listening what's happening around, noticing the changes of the language. Just teaching your students like, hi, hello is informal and how do you do is formal is the wrong way. Because I don't think they say very often how do you do already. Rather, they would come and say, what's up? And you think, oh my goodness, what was it? Right, context is important. Where, under what circumstances the language was working this or that way. Authenticity, relevance, and most important, how you can use it in your life. How can you use language to do something? To ask functions, right? To pay a compliment, to buy something, and so on. And awareness of varieties. Yes, we say that it is not necessary to develop consistent American or British pronunciation. Being more or less consistent is important, but recognizing, understanding the difference, it is important. We need to teach it. Because apart from American and British, we have Indian, a lot of, quite a range of Asian, which probably we are not aware of, unless you go to some TEFL Asia conference and most of the speakers will speak. English that you will probably have to make efforts to understand because you're not used to it. So what, how and why we teach this or that part of language. Just an example which regards to this first dynamic nature of language. You all know these words like salad and what was the other? Sandwich, right? Are those verbs or nouns? Used to be nouns, right? In London, this is the window shop. I don't think you can see, but the announcement is, do you salad or sandwich today? And this is an example of verbalization of nouns. However, the research shows that mostly nominalization with verbs is happening. So this is probably two ways, and maybe some language researchers will find out the frequency and tendency. But this is how the language works. I mean, if some of your students does something like this, maybe do not point out it as a mistake immediately. Right, more considerations. What are the valuable competences, skills that we need to develop with our teachers because of this global trends? Teaching students to accommodate. Well, when you in this country go to, I don't know, to Krasnodar, for example, where people speak softer, pronounce consonants in a different way, you may notice that in a week time you start doing the same, and this is fine, right? This is exactly about English. Depending on the environment, you will be accommodating. When in the US you probably develop this wanna stuff very quickly, right? And negotiate meaning. Teach students to clarify if they do not understand something. This is okay. If you do not understand and ask. If you do not understand and do not ask, this is not okay. Trying to be flexible. Trying to notice what is happening, what is the meaning that stands behind the words, and use different strategies to achieve different goals with English. Right, we are getting very close to the end. So regarding the words, I give you the choice from that research I've been mentioning. And the choice is between 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 7,000 key words. We call them word families, groups of words. How many do you think would be sufficient to be considerably fluent in English?
2,000.
2,000 is not bad actually, because this is 81%. So for some of your students, this is going to be a great achievement. 3,000 would be fantastic for other more proficient students, and probably for the teachers as well, right? However, the target for the teachers, school teachers, would be the 7,000. So you see that actually these are valuable, important numbers, but also it is important to be aware of what word groups you are learning, what group words you are using actively in your language. Right, we are lucky because of these digital developments through the last 30, 40 years. We have national corpus, British national corpus, American national corpus, and it contains modern language and it is renewed regularly, which means that you can always consult for free using your mobile devices whether the word is the right word in your context, whether you actually want to say this, or if you are working on synonyms. Just using good and nice always is not enough for proficiency, right? What other words could be, and what other words would be appropriate? National corpus also, apart from frequency a list of words, it also shows the collocations, how the words are getting along with each other. The fourth bullet point, common collocations, shows that actually we do say fast car, fast food. This is normal. But you may not differentiate between quick and fast. but you can't say quick car and quick food. Don't ask why. This is the tendency, these are the frequencies, these are the frequent collocations, and this is an easy tool that helps you teaching English, teaching not words in a dictionary, but teaching the language that students can use for some practical purposes. Right, what else? Well, we've got families, chunks. Well, thanks to our good friend Arakin, we do remember that we were having the structures, right? Structures, in fact, these are chunks. And chunks are pieces of language, bigger than word, smaller than a sentence, but some useful phrases that actually stay in your head and you can use them without any mistakes or any hesitations if you are with them for a long time. And what is very valuable, not culturally rooted language. Of course, it's a great pleasure sometimes to read about the royal family, learn how they live, or get to some traditions like St. Patrick's Day. This is fine, this is part of culture, this is part of the language. But being not that rooted and bringing more cultures is far more valuable and useful for the learners. Grammar. I don't know whether it is disappointing or praising. Actually, we can be tolerant with third person singular. Something like, he practiced the flute every day, which may irritate you as a teacher a lot, and you may come with a lot of drills to get rid of it. Still, this is not impeding comprehension. This is not impeding communication. Focus on something which is more important, okay? Pluralization. This is the tendency in this changing language, like feedbacks, informations, homeworks, right? Yeah, I'm coming to the end. Or regarding the intonation in questions. You are tired? You are tired. Are you tired? Are you tired? So it may work both, and it would depend on the context. An interesting thing, again, maybe a release for non-native teachers, using no or right instead of question tags. Florence is beautiful, no? Right, and this is actually it. Thank you very much indeed.